State Senator Rob Sampson joining us here on Talk of the Town. Senator Sampson, good morning, sir.
Good morning to you, Steve.
Always a pleasure to speak with you, sir. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about this special session that's coming up here. And you had a column that you put out last week kind of warning against this creep, I guess is the best word for it. You always have this happens everywhere. You start out with a particular plan, and then you have mission creep, where more and more stuff gets added to this, more and more gets thrown into the mix, and it's pretty scary, especially when we're talking about this mail-in voting, this absentee ballot voting that they're pushing.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, and I mean it's really more than just mission creep. I think it's really a situation where the Democrats see an opportunity to distract voters from the important issues of the upcoming November election, which is really the direction of our state going forward and our economic viability into the future. And they're going to use this special session as an opportunity to talk about other issues, which I think they perceive as beneficial to them. One of them is the COVID voting situation. There's also the police accountability bill, and they're also talking about a couple of other issues, which I think are just opportunities for them to make waves and make hay, about Republicans and putting Republicans in a bad light by forcing us to vote against legislation that sounds good to the public, even though it may not be good.
Yeah, it's funny how that works, isn't it? It's always, well, no, come on, it's something we can agree to. We can come to the middle on this. We can all come together on this. And then as soon as you get kind of that acquiescence, then all of a sudden you start finding all of these other little things that have been thrown into the mix that are really just unacceptable.
Exactly, and that's exactly what's going on with the mail-in voting situation. I think that Republicans and Democrats agree, Steve, that we need to account for COVID-19 as a factor in these upcoming elections, both the primary in the next couple of weeks and also the general election in November, and have a way to deal with it. And I think it's almost universal. In fact, I don't know any of my colleagues that oppose the idea of modifying our state laws to allow for people to use COVID-19 as a reason for an absentee ballot application. And I think that if we went in and we took a legitimate up or down vote on expanding the situation to cover that, everybody would be happy. We'd all go in, vote for it, and it'd be a quick day, and we'd all be happy. The problem is that they want to add a bunch of other items into this bill now, a lot of long-standing Democrat agenda items about allowing people to vote as long as they're in line at 8 o'clock, expanding polling places, getting rid of the cross-check to fight, Election Day fraud. These are things that Republicans just cannot abide by. And you can see the writing on the wall. This is kind of what I talked about in my column, which is that the Democrats are going to cleverly take an issue that the public is very much behind, that Republicans are very much behind, and the Democrats support also. Bring us in, and instead of letting us vote on that specific issue and everyone's happy, they're going to end up dividing us by adding all of these other items into the bill, and really for the purpose of being able to come back in November and say, hey, look, the Republicans, the Republicans want you to die,
Yeah.
They don't want you to vote in November because of COVID. And it's just dishonest, and I think it's a terrible way that politics has become.
Yeah, but it's been like this for a while. I mean, that's always been the claim. Republicans want you to die. Republicans want to push Granny off the cliff. It's just par for the course.
Right.
There's no legitimacy to that discussion or to that argument, and to even give it any legitimacy, I think, is a mistake.
No, I completely agree. But this is just a chance for them to perpetuate that myth and paint that picture, which clearly they're successful with it, because a lot of people, and I get an opportunity to talk to constituents on a regular basis, a lot of people have preconceived misconceptions about what the political parties stand for. Most notably is, people will say that the Democrats are the party of the working stiffs, and not the rich, folks, the rich 1%. Or they'll say that, the Democrats are the party of tolerance, and Republicans, are not. And that's the complete opposite of reality from where I sit. The Republican Party is the party that defends every individual liberty and right for citizens to live their lives the way they choose to. We don't put people into categories by color, by sexual orientation, and then pit them against each other as the Democrats do. Just an example.
Now, the problem I have with this voting, the way they're doing it here in Connecticut is, first of all, let's leave the fraud aspect out of this. That's obvious. Okay, it's obvious that mail-in voting is just a great way to commit voter fraud. The bigger problem, I think, is the fact that it's going to be absolute chaos. And the example not even an example. Here's it just happened in New York. New York had mail-in ballots for their primary. We're now 3 weeks out from the primary, and they still don't know who won most of the races. There's one district, the 12th Congressional District in New York, where they have 65,000 ballots. They've counted 800 of them. I mean, imagine that happening in a presidential election. There's just no way we would know who won by Inauguration Day, I would think. And
right.
The second half of that is the lawsuits are going to be out of control. There's going to be so many court cases brought if they do this way that nobody's ever going to view that election as being legitimate, ever.
No, I completely agree. And I don't think there will ever be a result that anyone can rely upon. And this has been my issue with many of the proposals put forward by the Secretary of State and Democrats in recent years. All of us want to see people voting. There's no one who wants to see less people voting. We want to see people participating in our electoral process, understanding what's going on in government, holding their representatives accountable. That's what we all want. The difference is I want that election to mean something. I want it to have integrity. I want people to trust the results were accurate. And as you were stating, that is certainly not going to happen. In California, they had a recent primary election also, and they threw out over 100,000 ballots, Steve. Can you imagine? It's inconceivable to me. How can you ever say that you had a legitimate election when you're not going to count 100,000 of the votes? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and again, you're going to have people sitting there arguing about why this ballot is being thrown out. There's not going to be any backup as far as proving that was the intent of the person. The reasons are going to be argued about. Well, this was a mark. Somebody put a mark over on the wrong side of the page here, and that totally invalidates the whole ballot. I mean, that kind of, we saw that stuff going on in Florida in 2000. Do we want to even have that nationwide?
Right, and this is on a much, much larger scale. And it's because our voter rolls are just so inaccurate. There are tens of thousands of people on the voting rolls in Connecticut that should not be there. They're people that have passed on, or they've moved out of state, or they moved from town to town, and they appear on the voting rolls in numerous places, or they don't appear at all. So I'm getting as many reports about people who are receiving multiple ballots at home. I've talked to people who got a ballot in their married name and their maiden name. So they have two ballots in front of them. Which one do they use? I have people contacting me to say that they got ballots for the last 5 people that lived at their address. What do they do with those ballots? Do they return them? Do they try and find those people? And then there's people who did not get a ballot at all who should have. So you have every kind of conceivable problem, and I don't think that this is it's not even necessary. If we were to change the law to say that COVID is an acceptable reason for an absentee ballot, then people could use the current process, which is by no means perfect and needs a lot of correction. But at least you would not have chaos.
Look, if we can go to the grocery store, we can go to the voting places. I find this whole thing to be just so disingenuous. And again, it comes from a Secretary of State who just a few years ago refused to work with the Trump administration to try to figure out if voting fraud even occurs. I mean, they put together, right after he got elected, they put together that agency or that panel, the committee to look into voter fraud, and our Secretary of State just flat out refused to share data. I mean,
right. Yeah, the claim from the Democrats, Steve, is always that there is no voter fraud, that Republicans are making that up. And the thing they use to point to it is that it's very difficult to catch people in voter fraud, especially because of the way they have rigged the laws. Absentee voter fraud is the worst kind because there is almost no way to catch the person. Essentially what happens is you're talking about a document that doesn't have any names or anything on it to actually go back and track it to or where it came from. there's been reports. I've talked to numerous registrars all across this state about the way these things are done. I hate to even mention them on the radio and give people ideas, but just imagine, someone who is up to no good discovers all of the absentee ballot applications, or ultimately the ballots showing up in the common mailbox in an apartment building. Or maybe someone is going to apply for absentee ballot applications for an entire nursing home full of people. These things do happen, and there's no way to track it because essentially no one's going to know who completed the document, either for the application or the ballot in the end. And how do you prosecute someone when you don't even know about it until long after it happens, and there's still no way to find out who did it?
Well, and the other side of this, the other issue here, like I said, is putting the fraud issue aside, is 100,000 absentee ballots were returned as undeliverable. And to me, that means that our voter rolls are in horrific shape. And I've had somebody on the show here who was actually a politician, runs for office all the time here. He's done a lot of door-to-door knocking on doors and stuff, and he will tell you the voting rolls just here in Waterbury are horrific. They're horribly out of date and inaccurate. And yet we're going to base an entire election on that? That's ridiculous. But
voting rolls are determined by voluntary action for people that vote, which we know is a relatively, I don't want to say small, but it's certainly not our whole population. I don't know what the statistics in Waterbury, probably 65% of people vote in a general election. So those are the only people that are supposed to show up on the voting rolls. But when they move, when they relocate, when people pass on, no one's calling the registrar and say, hey, by the way, you need to take off John Smith because he moved to Hamden instead of Waterbury. So that person's name stays on the voter rolls. And there are unscrupulous people in this world. It's just a fact that some people are going to get multiple ballot applications in the mail to their address. And it's an invitation. It's an invitation for cheating. And we should never put that incentive in front of people.
No. Well, look, there's already a process. If you're not comfortable in voting, there is already an absentee ballot process that you can go through. And like you said, all you've got to do is just add, fear of COVID-19 to that and then move forward. But this just automatic mailing out of these absentee ballot requests to every single voter on the rolls in the state of Connecticut, first of all, is a waste of money. Second of all, it's an invitation to chaos. And I just don't understand why we are moving so quickly down this path.
Right. Well, I understand why it's happening, Steve, but not for any good or honest intent. That's for sure. And you also got these mailboxes. I don't know if you've seen a photograph yet.
Oh, yeah.
Of these things. They look like your typical U.S. Postal Service mailbox, but instead of blue, they're painted white and gold. And these are the places where people would drop off their ballots. What an unsecure method of doing anything, and something that can be tampered with. What if someone throws a soft drink in the slot? Well, it boggles the mind why we would put something like that out in a place where it can be vandalized or tampered with when it's such a sensitive situation. We need to have valid, accurate elections that people can count on. This is not a third world country. People trust what happens in American elections because they know that there is integrity in the process. And each one of these steps that has been taken by our Secretary of State undermines that integrity.
The other item on the agenda is this police accountability bill. And again, I don't think on the face of it, anybody would disagree that there needs to be some reforms. There needs to be some items fixed. We talk about it here on the show quite a bit. Some of these police contracts, these union contracts, have such ridiculous things in them as to make the police almost immune from any bad behavior, and those things need to be addressed. However, by eliminating or this qualified immunity and things like that, I mean, that's going in the complete wrong direction. I mean, they always push this pendulum too far.
Yeah, I completely agree, Steve. What's really remarkable about the first part of your comments is that that's a bill I put in every year to require government contracts to be subject to the Freedom of Information Act, because many of those contracts have something called supersedence, which basically is a term that means that contract can supersede state law. It can be outside of the realm of all of the laws that you and I have to follow. Those union contracts do not have to follow the law. And in one of those ways is that they can be immune from freedom of information. And it's a mechanism that ends up ultimately allowing all sorts of craziness you couldn't possibly imagine to be in a government union contract is in there because they feel like it's protected and no one's going to know anyway. So we can put things in there to protect even individual officers that have bad records and so forth. That is something that needs to be changed. There's no question about it. The problem is, as you said, the bill has 42 sections the last time I looked at it. And who knows what the ultimate bill will be. That's the other thing about all of this, is that what we're talking about and what they actually put in front of us on the day we're going to vote is guaranteed to be two separate things, and guaranteed to be worse, in my opinion, because what the Democrats want is they want to make a political statement. Again, they want to distract from the destruction of our state's economy, and they want to talk about these side issues. They want to talk about social issues because they think it's a benefit to them. They want to put Republicans in a bad light, that we're against protecting people from COVID. It's a bunch of nonsense. It's very political, and I hope that people see through it, not just over the next few weeks as we vote on this stuff, but also when Election Day comes and they're receiving flyers in the mail that say, oh, Senator Sampson wants you to die because he didn't want you to vote. Because I absolutely am in favor of modifying our law to allow people to vote absentee because of COVID. But I might not have the chance because they're going to try and put a bunch of garbage in that bill that I will not want to support.
And you make a great point about distracting from serious issues. And look, I talk about the economy here in the state all the time. I talk about the out-of-control spending at the state level that just doesn't seem to be stopping, and not even any desire to stop it. But we look at the economic devastation that has been caused by this COVID-19 pandemic here in Connecticut and across the country, and the fact that that's not even on the agenda of this special session. We were already looking at fiscal problems before this hit when you were coming back for the shortened session. And
right.
Again, we're going to have to be addressing these things. That got obviously completely wiped off the table when they shut down the Capitol, and you guys were basically told, okay, we're done. Why is this not even being brought up for conversation? We have serious, serious problems that need to be addressed here, and it's not even on the agenda.
Little of it makes sense to me, Steve. It really does. For the last several months, as we've been locked down under COVID and the legislature has not been in session, the one bit of conversation that has been, circling among the legislature is, when are we going to go in and fix the budget items that need to be rectified? It's part of our responsibility that in the second year of each biennium that we go back and we balance the budget, because it's never done properly or accurately. That's a whole other separate issue.
Right.
In the first year, but in the second year, you've got to come back and you've got to make some changes so that it all works out. And that's not even being addressed. We're not even going to deal with that issue. The police accountability bill, it's an important issue, but it doesn't deserve to be happening right now. We have a legislative process that requires that individual legislators are given an opportunity to propose legislation early on in a session. Then we have a committee process, which has legitimate public hearings that are properly noticed to allow people to come and participate in the process. And that's how we make law. And that's not what's happening here. The Democrats are going to use this special session as a way to create wedge issues. They're not going to have the proper chance for people to really direct that legislation by having input, and the final product will be poor. It'll be lousy, like a lot of other things that are done in haste, like the various gun control bills that we've done in the past, all as a result of some crisis that needs to be addressed right now. And I agree, there are things in our society that need to be addressed, and racial tensions and things like that. Sure, we got to have these conversations ongoing, and we need to write policy that makes sense for the people of our state. But it needs to be done through the proper manner and mechanism. And this just is not it.
How weird does it feel for you to be on the same side of an issue as the ACLU?
It happens once in a while. The thing is, the ACLU is the American Civil Liberties Union, and I am a very, very strong advocate of civil liberties. The difference between me and the ACLU is that I want to protect everyone's civil liberties all the time, and the ACLU likes to pick and choose whose civil liberties matter to them. But I'm glad that at least once in a while we can, be on the same side of an issue.
Well, I think you've got a lot of other stuff that you're going to have to be discussing as well, because as this emergency period comes to an end and all of these executive orders expire, along with that, there's going to be a lot of pieces that are going to need to be picked back up and put back together here as far as how this state is being run. And hopefully, beyond these issues that they want to talk about, we'll actually get to some real meat and potatoes issues and actually talk about solving some of these problems. I'm not optimistic that's going to happen, but I would like to think that there are going to be some serious people doing some serious work and addressing the serious issues that we have.
I agree. I mean, between you and me, Steve, I wish that my party leadership was doing a lot more to address the governor's overreach of authority. The Democrats ought to be afraid to bring us into session for the mere possibility that we're going to want to talk about all of the executive orders and the constitutionality of various decisions that have been made about determining which businesses are essential and non-essential and so forth. That's the debate we really need to be having, which is to put the governor, who has been running the state, and look, he's done some good things. I mean, I don't want to knock him 100%. I'm fair enough to say when Governor Lamont does something correct that he's correct, and I'm fair enough to go after the president when he's wrong too. But in this particular case, the governor has gradually moved farther and farther away from making policy based on the best interests of the citizens of the state and more about politics. And you can see it as a gradual uptick and more political executive orders as time has gone on. And they really need to be held to account, and they need to be checked. And that's our opportunity when we go into the legislature for special session. I just hope we use it.
As do I, sir. State Senator Rob Sampson, sir, always a pleasure speaking with you, and keep us in the loop as far as what happens up in Hartford when you do come together for this special session, and hopefully some of the topics that you and I just discussed right here get brought up, and they do start taking a serious look at some of the issues that we need to be looking at here to save this state, because I think we're really in a very, very dire strait.
Well, I will keep at it, Steve. The pleasure is all mine, as always, and I look forward to the next time we chat.
As do I, sir. Have a great afternoon.